Hello there, and welcome to Mythic Dreams. I'm so glad you found your way here. Maybe you're drawn to stories with darker edges, or maybe you find comfort in tales that explore the shadows as much as the light. Either way, you're in the right place tonight. Let your breathing deepen, your muscles soften, and allow yourself to drift. Because tonight, we're venturing into the frozen forests of Algonquian tradition, where winter's hunger takes a terrible form and ancient warnings echo through the pines. This is The Legend of the Wendigo, a story about transformation, survival, and the thin line between human and monster. If you enjoy these mythic journeys, subscribe to join us wherever the stories lead. But for now, close your eyes and rest. I was 27 when I first heard the name Wendigo whispered across a campfire in the northern woods of Minnesota, where the winter air cuts like glass against your skin, and the darkness between the trees seems to breathe. The old Ojibwe man who spoke it did so with such reverence and fear that his voice nearly disappeared into the crackling of the flames. And in that moment, I felt the forest around us grow unnaturally still, as if even the wind had paused to listen. I didn't know then how deeply that name would burrow into my thoughts, or how the story he shared would follow me long after I left those woods. Some tales are meant to be more than entertainment. They're warnings, passed down through generations who understood the true power of winter's isolation and hunger's desperate call. This is one such story, and I've never told it to another soul until now. The morning after our encounter at the lodge fireplace, I found Thomas waiting for me in the small dining area, his weathered hands wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee. He nodded toward the chair across from him, and I joined him without a word. Outside, the early light cast long blue shadows across the snow, and the thermometer by the window read 15 below zero. "You're not dressed for this country," he observed, eyeing my city boots and lightweight jacket. His own coat was well worn but sturdy, the kind passed down and patched through decades of northern winters. I wasn't planning to stay long, I admitted. My research trip was supposed to be 3 days at most, interview a few locals about regional folklore, record some notes, and head back to Minneapolis. Thomas smiled slightly. The North Country has its own plans sometimes. He drained his coffee and stood. "If you want to hear about the Wendigo, you should come with me today. Some stories need the right setting." I hesitated only briefly before agreeing. An hour later, we were in his old blue pickup truck, rattling down snow-packed roads that became increasingly narrow and unmarked. The forest pressed in on both sides, white pines and spruce heavy with snow, their shadows stretching like fingers across our path. My people have lived in these lands for countless generations, Thomas said, after a long silence. Before borders, before countries, the stories we keep are as old as the rocks and rivers. We passed abandoned logging camps, their skeletal frames barely visible among the trees, and frozen marshlands that stretched out in vast white plains. Occasionally, Thomas would point to a particular bend in the road or clearing among the trees and mention a name or event from decades past. Ordinary moments preserved in his memory that gave the landscape depth beyond what I could see. When we finally reached his cabin, I was struck by its unassuming presence, nestled among the pines as if it had grown there naturally. Smoke curled from the chimney, and as we approached, the door opened to reveal a young woman who nodded to Thomas and gave me a curious glance before climbing into the truck we had just exited. "My granddaughter," Thomas explained as we stamped the snow from our boots on the porch. "She checks on me when the weather turns. Thinks I'm too old to be out here alone." Inside, the cabin was warm and smelled of pine and wood smoke. Family photographs lined the walls, 4 generations at least, their faces shifting through time, but carrying the same quiet dignity I recognized in Thomas. He gestured for me to sit while he stoked the fire and put a kettle on the wood stove. "You study stories," he said. It wasn't a question. "Yes," I replied. "I'm researching indigenous folklore for my graduate thesis." Thomas nodded slowly. "There's a difference between studying stories and understanding of them." He arranged 2 mugs on the table between us. "In my family, I am what our people call a keeper of stories. Not just anyone can tell certain tales. Some must be earned, respected." The kettle began to whistle, and he poured steaming water into the mugs, adding dried leaves from a small wooden box. "Have you heard of the Wendigo before last night?" he asked, returning to his chair. "Only in books. Scholarly interpretations mostly." Thomas made a sound somewhere between a chuckle and a sigh. "The problem with putting our stories in your books is that they become just words on paper. Dead things. But true stories are alive. They change with the telling. They breathe with the teller." We sat in companionable silence, sipping the bitter tea. Outside, the light was already beginning to fade, though it was barely mid-afternoon. Winter in the north compresses time, folding daylight into brief, precious hours. "There are some stories you don't tell after dark," Thomas said finally, his eyes fixed on the window where twilight was gathering among the trees. "And the Wendigo is one of them." I felt a strange tension settle in the room, not unpleasant, but expectant, like the moment before snow falls from a heavy branch. "Why did you invite me here?" I asked. Thomas considered me for a long moment. "Because when you heard the name last night, I saw recognition in your eyes. Not knowledge, recognition, as if something in you already knew the story, was waiting to remember it." He leaned forward slightly. "And because some stories choose who needs to hear them." Thomas rose from his chair and moved to the window, watching as the last light faded from the sky. The forest outside disappeared into darkness, becoming a wall of black, broken only by the occasional shimmer of snow. When he turned back to me, his expression had changed, taking on a formality I hadn't seen before. "The Wendigo," he began, his voice dropping to almost a murmur, "is not just a monster from children's tales. To my people, it is both creature and spirit, a manifestation of winter itself, of starvation, of the isolation that can drive humans to terrible acts." He returned to his seat, adding another log to the fire before continuing. The flames cast dancing shadows across his face, deepening the lines around his eyes and mouth. In the Algonquian tradition, the Wendigo embodies the dangers of excess. It is born from selfishness, from taking more than you need, from valuing your own hunger above the lives of others. Outside, the wind picked up, sending a shower of ice crystals against the windows. Thomas paused, as if listening to it. "There are many ways a person might become Wendigo," he continued, "most commonly through the desperate act of consuming human flesh. In the old days, when winter stretched food supplies beyond breaking, it happened. A hunting party stranded by blizzard, a family isolated when game disappeared. Hunger makes people do unthinkable things." I shifted uncomfortably in my chair, the tea cooling forgotten in my hands. But the Algonquian understanding goes deeper. One might also transform through spiritual possession, the Wendigo spirit entering during the moments of weakness or moral failing, or through overwhelming greed that makes the heart grow cold. Thomas's description painted a vivid picture, an emaciated figure, impossibly tall, with skin stretched tight over bone like ash-colored ice, eyes sunken or glowing with hunger, lips torn or eaten away by its own teeth, a heart frozen solid in its chest. "The more it consumes, the larger it grows," Thomas said. "But it's never satisfied. That's the curse of the Wendigo, a hunger that can never be filled, a cold that can never be warmed." The fire popped loudly, sending a spark onto the hearth. Thomas rose again, this time moving to a small wooden cabinet in the corner. From it, he removed a bundle of dried herbs and a small stone bowl. "This is sage and sweet grass," he explained, noticing my curious gaze. "For protection. Speaking of the Wendigo invites its attention." He crushed some of the herbs into the bowl and lit them with a match, filling the cabin with sweet smoke. "You think it's real?" I said. It wasn't a question. Thomas considered this as he moved the smoking bowl in a slow circle. "I think the boundary between what your education calls real and what it dismisses as myth is not as firm as you might believe. Especially here, in winter, in the deep woods." He set the bowl on the table between us, and the smoke curled lazily upward in the still air of the cabin. The early French missionaries who first recorded our stories wrote of the Archon, their word for the Wendigo. In 1636, a Jesuit named Paul Le Jeune described a woman warning of this spirit that had eaten some Attica-Magukin and would eat many more if not called elsewhere. Thomas passed his hand through the smoke, directing it towards me. "What makes the Wendigo truly dangerous is not its physical form, but its voice," he said, his own voice dropping lower. "It can mimic those you trust, calling out in the voices of loved ones, luring you away from safety, deeper into isolation where you're vulnerable." The wind outside had grown stronger, moaning around the corners of the cabin. The sound, formless at first, began to take on an almost melodic quality, like a distant voice calling from far away. I glanced at Thomas and saw that he was listening to it as well, his expression unreadable. "It's getting late," he said finally, breaking the spell. "Tomorrow, if you're willing, I'll take you to a place where the old stories feel closer to the surface." I nodded, suddenly aware of how tense my body had become during his telling. As if sensing this, Thomas smiled, a genuine warmth breaking through his serious demeanor. "Don't worry," he said. "The Wendigo mostly hunts those who are alone. And tonight, you are not alone." I slept fitfully that night on Thomas's spare cot, dreaming of endless snow and distant voices. When morning came, it brought with it a heavy silence, the kind that follows fresh snowfall. Thomas was already awake, preparing a simple breakfast of cornmeal porridge and strong black coffee. "Did you hear it last night?" he asked as I joined him at the table. "Hear what?" "The wind," he replied, though something in his tone suggested he meant more than just the weather. As we ate, Thomas began to tell me a story that felt different from the previous night's teachings, more specific, anchored in documented history rather than spiritual tradition. In the winter of 1878 to 79, he began, a Cree trapper named Swift Runner took his family into the forests north of Edmonton to hunt. He was well respected in his community, had even served with the Northwest Mounted Police for a time. He knew the land, knew how to survive its harshness. Thomas's spoon clinked against his bowl as he set it down, his food half finished. That winter was unusually severe. Game became scarce. Temperatures dropped so low that sap froze inside the trees, causing them to split open with sounds like gunshots in the night. Outside the window, the forest stood silent under its fresh blanket of snow, the morning sun glinting off ice crystals. When spring finally came, only Swift Runner returned to his community. He told authorities that his entire family, his wife, 6 children, his brother, and his mother, had all died of starvation during the winter. Thomas paused, watching my reaction carefully. But when officials investigated, they discovered a different story. Swift Runner had killed and consumed his family, though there was evidence he still had other food available. He was tried and executed for his crimes. The porridge turned heavy in my stomach. "That's a documented case?" Thomas nodded. "One of many. My great-uncle knew people connected to the investigation. He said that when they found Swift Runner, the man was different, his eyes hollow, his behavior erratic. He would stare at nothing and mutter about voices in the trees." I set down my spoon. "You're suggesting this wasn't just murder and cannibalism, but an actual Wendigo transformation?" "I'm telling you how my people understood such events," Thomas replied evenly. "The European authorities saw only the crime. We saw the spiritual sickness behind it." The coffee had grown cold in my mug, but I drank it anyway, needing something to occupy my hands. "There were other cases," Thomas continued. "In the early 1900s, a Cree elder named Jack Fiddler was arrested for killing a woman he claimed was turning into a Wendigo. Before his arrest, he and his brother had reportedly killed at least 14 people who showed signs of transformation." "Signs like what?" I asked. "Extreme antisocial behavior, self-isolation, reporting strange cravings or hearing voices calling them into the forest. Physical symptoms, too. Sensations of ice in the veins, lips and mouth becoming painfully dry or cracked." I thought of contemporary psychology. "It sounds like what we might call psychosis today." "Indeed," Thomas nodded. "Western medicine eventually named it Wendigo psychosis, a culture-bound syndrome documented among northern Algonquian communities. A disorder where the afflicted believe they're transforming into a Wendigo, developing an obsessive desire to consume human flesh." He rose and began clearing our breakfast dishes. "But whether you call it psychosis or spiritual possession, the question remains. Why did this particular form of madness emerge here, among these people, in this landscape?" I watched as he washed the bowls in a basin of water heated on the wood stove. His movements were deliberate, practiced from decades of self-sufficiency. "Do you think it was just a way to explain cannibalism during times of starvation?" I asked. "A cultural framework for an unthinkable taboo?" Thomas dried his hands on a worn cloth and turned to me. "That's what your anthropology professors would say, isn't it? But consider this. The Wendigo legend existed long before documented cases of cannibalism. The fear came first, not as explanation, but as warning." He moved to the window, looking out at the expanse of white. "My people survived countless winters in this land. We developed rules, taboos, spiritual practices, all designed to help us resist the isolation, the desperate selfishness that deep winter can breed." Thomas turned back to me, his expression serious. "The Wendigo may be a story, but it points to something real, the monster that lives in the human heart when community bonds break down, when survival becomes individual rather than collective." He began gathering items into a small pack: water, dried meat, extra mittens. "There's a place not far from here," he said. "A place where the veil between worlds feels thinner. If you truly want to understand the Wendigo beyond academic theories, I can take you there." The invitation carried a weight I couldn't fully articulate. Part warning, part test. I hesitated only briefly before nodding my agreement. "Dress warmly," Thomas said. Where we're going, the cold has teeth." We set out as dawn broke, the sky shifting from black to deep blue to a pale, luminous grey. Thomas led the way on a narrow trail that would have been invisible to me without his guidance. A subtle depression in the snow, occasional markers on trees that seemed indistinguishable from natural features until he pointed them out. The cold was different here than any I had experienced before. Not just an absence of heat, but an active presence that searched for any exposed skin, any weakness in layers. My breath crystallized instantly, forming ice on my scarf and eyelashes. The silence was absolute, except for the squeak of our boots on snow and the occasional distant crack of a tree adjusting to the cold. "This land has memory," Thomas said, after we had walked for perhaps an hour. His voice seemed unnaturally loud in the stillness. "The old ones believed that places remember what happens in them. Some memories sink deeper than others." The forest had changed subtly as we walked, the trees growing older and more widely spaced, their branches forming a cathedral-like canopy overhead. Occasionally, Thomas would pause, listening to something I couldn't hear, before continuing on with renewed purpose. Finally, we emerged from the trees onto the edge of a frozen lake, its surface an unbroken expanse of white stretching to distant shores. Mountains rose beyond, their peaks lost in low clouds. The sun, now fully risen but weak in the winter sky, cast a strange pearlescent light over everything, making the landscape appear both vivid and somehow unreal, like a photograph slightly overexposed. Thomas stopped at the lake's edge and removed his mittens despite the cold. From his pocket, he took a small pouch and sprinkled what looked like tobacco onto the snow while speaking softly in a language I didn't understand. "An offering," he explained when he finished. "A sign of respect." He pointed to a rocky outcropping about halfway around the lake's perimeter, where the forest receded up a steep incline. "There," he said. "Do you see the shadow beneath the overhang? That's the entrance to a cave system. In the old stories, it's said to be a Wendigo dwelling." I squinted, making out the dark recess he indicated. From this distance, it appeared as nothing more than a smudge against the white landscape, but I felt a peculiar reluctance to approach it closer. "I was lost in these woods once," Thomas said, his eyes still fixed on the distant cave. "I was young, maybe 12, and had wandered too far from my grandfather's fishing camp. Night fell, and with it came a storm that covered my tracks." He fell silent, and I waited, somehow knowing the importance of not interrupting this memory. I found shelter under a fallen tree, but as the temperature dropped, I knew I might not survive until morning. That's when I heard it. My mother's voice, calling my name from deeper in the forest. Thomas turned to me, his face solemn. I knew my mother was 50 miles away in our village, yet her voice was there, so clear, so familiar. It promised warmth, safety, if only I would follow it deeper into the trees. A gust of wind swept across the lake, sending a spiral of loose snow into the air between us. What saved me was remembering my grandfather's warnings about the Wendigo's tricks. I stayed put until dawn, though the voice called all night. When morning came, I found my way back by following the sun. Thomas gestured for us to continue walking along the lake shore, though not in the direction of the cave. My grandfather was not surprised by my story. He told me the Wendigo had been testing me, seeing if I was vulnerable to its call. The wind had picked up, creating ghostly shapes that danced across the lake's frozen surface. As we walked, I noticed how sound carried strangely here, sometimes muffled completely, sometimes eerily amplified. A raven's call from the distant shore reached us, as clearly as if the bird perched on my shoulder, while the crunch of our own footsteps seemed to disappear into the snow. "Do you still believe it was the Wendigo calling you?" I asked. Thomas didn't answer immediately. When he did, his voice was thoughtful. "What I believe is that something in these woods recognized a child alone and afraid. Whether you call that something a spirit, a monster, or simply the dangerous indifference of nature depends on the stories you were raised with." He stopped suddenly, his head tilted slightly as if listening. I froze beside him, holding my breath, though I wasn't sure why. For a moment, there was nothing but the wind. Then, so faintly I might have imagined it, what sounded like a human voice calling from far across the ice. "The old ones believe that speaking of the Wendigo can summon it," Thomas said quietly, "which is why we must close this story properly before we leave this place." We found shelter from the wind behind a cluster of boulders near the shore. Thomas cleared a small area of snow and gestured for me to sit beside him. The lake stretched before us, its frozen surface catching the winter light like hammered silver. "To understand the Wendigo," Thomas said, "you must understand transformation, how a human being, someone's child, parent, friend, becomes something else entirely." He drew patterns in the snow with his finger as he spoke, abstract spirals and symbols I didn't recognize. "It begins with isolation. Deep winter in the northern territories cuts people off from one another. In the old days, a hunter might not see another human face for months. In that solitude, the mind turns inward, becomes its own wilderness. The wind had calmed, leaving an almost preternatural stillness. Even the distant ravens had fallen silent. Then comes hunger," Thomas continued, "not just for food, but for companionship, for the warmth of human contact. Hunger that gnaws at more than just the belly." He described the physical transformation as the Ojibwe understood it. The slow hollowing out of the body, skin pulling tight across bone, eyes sinking into the skull, lips cracking from perpetual thirst. "But the true change happens in the heart," he said. "It grows cold, not metaphorically, but physically cold. In some stories, the Wendigo's heart becomes ice, and this is the source of its endless hunger. No matter how much it consumes, it can never warm itself from within." Thomas explained how, in Ojibwe belief, the Wendigo grows with each meal but is never satisfied. Its hunger expands with its body, an endless cycle of consumption and emptiness, a perfect metaphor for insatiable greed. This is why the Wendigo was more than just a campfire tale to frighten children, he said. It was a warning about the dangers of placing individual desires above community needs, of taking more than your share when resources are scarce. A sharp crack echoed across the lake, just ice shifting in the cold, but the sound made me flinch. Thomas smiled slightly at my reaction. "Not all Wendigo stories end in horror," he said, his tone shifting. "There is one tale, less often told, of a young woman who defeated a Wendigo through sacrifice and courage." He brushed away his previous drawings in the snow and began a new one, a simple figure with outstretched arms. This happened many generations ago, when a particularly harsh winter had forced a small band of Ojibwe to break into family groups to search for food. One young woman, named Misabe, found herself alone when her parents died of fever. Thomas's voice took on a rhythmic quality, as if he had told this story many times before. Misabe was strong and skilled, but winter was stronger. As her supplies dwindled, she began to hear voices in the wind, her parents calling her to join them, promising warmth and food if only she would follow. I thought of his own childhood experience, wondering if this tale had special meaning for him. Miss Abe knew the legends. She recognized the Wendigo's call. But rather than hide or flee, she did something unexpected. She answered. Thomas looked up at me, gauging my reaction. She called, back to the voice, agreeing to meet it. But instead of following blindly, she prepared herself. She built a fire larger than any she had made before, using all the wood she had gathered. She melted snow for water and placed stones in the flames until they glowed red. The sun had moved westward, casting longer shadows across the snow. In the distance, where forest met shoreline, I thought I saw movement. Probably a deer or fox, though I couldn't be sure. When the Wendigo came, a towering figure of ice and bone, Miss Abe stood her ground. She offered it food, but not human flesh. She had prepared a feast of everything she had: dried berries, pine needle tea, the last of her smoked fish. "I give you what sustains me," she told it, freely shared rather than taken. Thomas's drawing in the snow had become more complex, symbols surrounding the central figure. The Wendigo raged at the offering, but Miss Abe remained calm. She told it she recognized the human it had once been, a hunter from a neighboring band who had disappeared the previous winter. She spoke his name, reminding him of his humanity, while she worked the hot stones with sticks, moving them closer to the creature. Thomas paused, looking out across the lake toward the cave in the distance. As steam arose from the stones, the Wendigo's icy heart began to melt. With each drop, it shrank in size, its memories of humanity returning. By dawn, where the monster had stood, there was only a thin, weakened man who wept with gratitude and shame. Thomas smoothed away the drawing with his mitten. Miss Abe nursed him back to health, and together they survived until spring. When they returned to their people, they brought not just themselves, but the knowledge of how to defeat the winter's darkest spirit. Not through violence, but through compassion, through remembering our shared humanity even in our most monstrous moments. He stood, brushing snow from his clothes. That story isn't told as often, perhaps because it's harder to believe that monsters can be redeemed than that they exist in the first place. The sun was beginning its descent now, the temperature dropping noticeably with it. Thomas looked toward the darkening tree line and said quietly, "We should start back. We don't want to be here after sunset." The journey back through the woods felt longer, more laborious than our morning trek. Shadows lengthened across the snow, and the temperature dropped sharply as the weak winter sun began to set. Neither of us spoke much, conserving energy for the walk and perhaps both lost in thought. About halfway back, Thomas stopped suddenly, raising his hand for me to do the same. He stood perfectly still, head slightly tilted, listening. I followed his example, straining my ears against the silence. At first I heard nothing but the faint whisper of wind through bare branches. Then, at the very edge of perception, something else. A sound like distant laughter, or perhaps crying. It was impossible to tell which, or even if it was human at all. After a moment, it faded entirely. Thomas began walking again without comment, but his pace had quickened. "Winter is when the boundary thins," he said, after we had gone some distance. "Not just between life and death, but between worlds, the world of the physical and the world of spirit." A raven called from somewhere overhead, its harsh voice echoing through the trees. I glanced up, but couldn't spot the bird among the dense branches. The missionaries who came to convert my ancestors didn't understand our stories, Thomas continued. They wrote about the Wendigo as if it were merely a superstition, a primitive fear they could dispel with their new religion. But some of them, those who spent years in these northern territories, began to understand. He described journals written by priests who had lived among the Algonquian peoples, how their tone changed over time, from dismissive to uncertain to deeply respectful of the spiritual ecology they had entered. One Jesuit wrote that the Wendigo was not a pagan devil, but a manifestation of the wilderness itself, a mirror held up to the darkest potential of the human soul. He was closer to understanding than most. The trail narrowed as we entered a denser section of forest. Overhead, the first stars had appeared in the darkening sky, though daylight still lingered in the west. My people used the Wendigo stories to teach our children about moderation and respect, Thomas said. The natural world gives us what we need, but it must be approached with humility, with awareness of limits. Take more than you need. Waste what you take. Think only of yourself. These are the first steps on the Wendigo path. I thought about how different this was from the common portrayal of the Wendigo in popular culture, the antlered beast of horror films and video games, divorced from its cultural context and moral complexity. These teachings seem especially relevant today, I ventured. Overconsumption, environmental degradation. The Wendigo spirit wears many masks across time, Thomas nodded. My grandfather used to say that the monster adapts to what each generation fears most. We walked in silence for some time after that, the path becoming harder to discern in the failing light. Once, Thomas stopped to reorient himself, studying the pattern of stars now visible above the tree line. "There's something I haven't told you," he said, as we finally came within sight of his cabin, its windows glowing with lamplight. "About why I decided to share these stories with you specifically." Inside, the cabin was just as we had left it, though the fire had burned down to embers. Thomas immediately set about reviving it, adding kindling and small logs with practiced efficiency. "You mentioned yesterday that you're researching indigenous folklore for your thesis," he said, as flames began to catch. "But that's not the whole truth, is it?" I felt a strange uneasiness, like being caught in a small lie that concealed a larger one. "What do you mean?" Thomas straightened from the fireplace, regarding me with kind but knowing eyes. "When people come seeking stories of the Wendigo, they usually have their own hunger driving them. Rarely is it purely academic." He gestured for me to sit while he prepared tea, the same bitter herbal mixture from the previous day. Outside, darkness had fallen completely, the windows reflecting our movements against the black night. "3 times now, I've noticed you checking your phone when you thought I wasn't looking. Not for signals, there aren't any out here, but for recordings. You're documenting our conversations." I felt my face flush with embarrassment. "I'm sorry. It's habit, researcher instinct. I should have asked." Thomas handed me a steaming mug. "I'm not angry, but I am curious about what drives your interest. Few people trek this far north in winter, just for academic citations." The fire popped and hissed as resin pockets in the wood ignited. I wrapped my hands around the warm mug, considering how much to reveal. "My grandmother used to tell stories," I said finally. "Not about the Wendigo specifically, but similar themes. Beings that called to travelers, voices in storms. She was from northern Michigan originally, though she never identified as indigenous." Thomas nodded slowly. "The stories have a way of traveling, changing in the telling but keeping their essence. Sometimes they find their way home eventually." "She had night terrors her whole life," I continued. "Dreams of being pursued through endless snow. When she was dying, Her last coherent words were a warning about the winter that walks. I've been trying to understand what she meant ever since. "Ah," Thomas said softly. "Now we come to it. You're not just collecting stories. You're searching for something personal in them." He was right, though I hadn't fully admitted this to myself until now. I suppose I am. "Then perhaps," Thomas said, "the stories have been searching for you as well." Morning arrived with a landscape transformed. Snow had fallen heavily during the night, covering our tracks from the previous day and draping the forest in pristine white. The world outside Thomas's window seemed renewed, the harshness of winter temporarily disguised by beauty. I found Thomas at his workbench near the wood stove, his nimble fingers carving a small object from what looked like antler or bone. He worked with such focus that he didn't notice me until I was standing beside him. "Almost finished," he said without looking up. His knife made a few more precise cuts. Then he polished the piece with a scrap of leather, burnishing it to a soft glow. "For you," he said, placing it in my palm. It was a pendant, a simple oval with intricate patterns carved around its edge, and what appeared to be a stylized figure at its center. "Protection," Thomas explained. "A reminder of what you've learned here." I turned it over in my hand, feeling its smooth weight. "Thank you. I don't know what to say." "Words aren't always necessary," Thomas replied, rising stiffly from his bench. "But stories are. They keep us connected across time and distance." After a simple breakfast, I gathered my few belongings. Thomas had arranged for his granddaughter to drive me back to town, and she would be arriving soon. As we waited, watching the road for her truck, Thomas seemed contemplative. "What will you do with these stories?" he asked finally. "The ones I've shared with you?" I considered this carefully. "I'll honor them," I said. "Include them in my research, but not as curiosities or folklore to be dissected, as living wisdom that deserves respect." Thomas nodded, seeming satisfied with this answer. "And what about your grandmother's winter that walks? Have you found what you were looking for?" "I think," I said slowly, "that I understand her better now. The fears she carried weren't just personal nightmares, but echoes of something older. Something passed down through generations, even when its origins were forgotten." In the distance, the sound of an approaching engine broke the morning quiet. Thomas's granddaughter would be here in minutes. "Before you go," Thomas said, "there's one last thing about the Wendigo you should know." He paused, choosing his words carefully. "The legends say it can hibernate for years, decades even. It waits patiently for the right conditions: isolation, desperation, moral weakness. Then it awakens, hungry as ever." He looked directly into my eyes. "But humans too can be patient. We've carried these warnings for countless winters, passed them through generations. Our vigilance is as enduring as the threat." The truck appeared around the bend in the road, moving carefully through the fresh snow. Thomas walked me to the porch steps. "Remember," he said as we said our goodbyes, "respect the wild places and what they contain. Not just the forests and mountains, but the wild places within yourself as well. That's where the real protection lies." As the truck carried me away from Thomas's cabin, I watched the landscape pass by with new eyes. The forest no longer seemed merely beautiful or threatening, but alive with meaning, with memory. The pendant rested against my chest, a small weight that somehow felt significant. Back in my hotel room that evening, preparing for my return to the city the next day, I found myself standing at the window, looking out at the town's lights reflecting off the snow. In the distance, the dark line of the forest marked the boundary between civilization and wilderness. a line that seemed both more defined and more permeable than before. I thought of Thomas's words about stories choosing who needs to hear them, about warnings passing through generations even when their original context is lost. Perhaps the Wendigo legend had endured, not despite its transformations, but because of them, adapting to remain relevant as human fears evolved. My hand went to the pendant, tracing its carved pattern as I watched a snowflake spiral past my window, caught in a current of air. It danced there for a moment, suspended between earth and sky, before continuing its journey downward into the waiting night. If you've ever stood at the edge of wilderness as darkness falls, feeling both drawn to and wary of what lies beyond the reach of electric light, then perhaps you understand something of what I learned in those northern woods. The oldest stories remind us that boundaries between human and nature, between reason and instinct, between what nourishes us and what consumes us, are more fragile than we care to admit, especially in the deepest cold of winter.